Is that that was just a comment? Okay, all right. All right, so the staff recommendation on the first issue of enrollment growth is to hold open the enrollment growth amount and the proposed growth formula until the May revise. We will take that information shared today and anxiously await the May revise figures. So next, actually, I want to make sure that we have enough people to take care of some business. I'd like to move back on the agenda to the vote-only calendar. We have issue 1, the capital outlay proposals as proposed in the governor's budget, funding for 7 capital outlay projects as laid out in the staff report. All of these projects were included in the Department of Finance's 5-year infrastructure plan released earlier this year. All have been approved by the Chancellor's office. Staff has reviewed these proposals and recommends approval of the capital outlay proposals as proposed.
I move approval of issue 1 capital outlay proposals, noting that El Camino Community College is there.
Thank
My
you.
alma mater.
And okay, motion by Mr. Chavez, second by Mr. Ting. Roll call, please.
Mr. Murasugi.
Aye.
Mr. Chavez.
Aye.
Mr. Dababne. Aye. Mr. Nastande. Mr. Ting.
Thank you. And moving on then to issue 2, the redevelopment agency funding and backfill process. The governor's budget proposes an increase of $38.4 million in Proposition 98 General Fund. I will not go into the detail as explained in the staff analysis. This, again, has been reviewed by Department of Finance, reviewed by the Chancellor's office. There does not appear to be any objections to this.
I move issue 2.
Okay, motion by Mr. Chavez, second by Mr. Nastande. Roll call, please.
Mr. Murasugi.
Aye.
Mr. Chavez. Aye. Mr. Dababne. Aye. Mr. Nastande. Aye. Mr. Ting.
Aye.
Thank you. We will now move back to issue number 2 on our agenda under the hearing items, the student success proposals. Mr. Rodriguez.
As part of the Student Success Initiative underway at the colleges, the Board of Governors have adopted a host of reforms that encourage students to participate in core matriculation services such as admissions, orientations, assessments, counseling, and student follow-up. Specifically, these reforms require colleges to offer core matriculation services to students and provide enrollment priority to students that have an educational plan. The current year budget includes nearly $100 million to support the colleges in providing these services to students. The governor's budget proposes a $100 million augmentation, which will fund nearly $200 million of these required services. Given that the colleges are required to provide these services to students and the fact that students must receive these services to receive enrollment priority, we believe that providing this augmentation is a good use of resources. In addition to ensuring that students receive core matriculation services, the Student Success Initiative also maintained a focus on student equity. This will be accomplished by requiring the colleges to complete a student equity plan. These plans require colleges to identify gaps in access and achievement by race, gender, and disability, and then set goals to reduce these identified gaps and detail actions that will be taken to achieve these goals. While these plans have not been required since categorical flexibility was enacted in 2008-9, all colleges will have an updated plan completed by this fall. As opposed to augmenting the myriad of categorical programs the state already has, the governor's budget proposes to provide $100 million to the colleges as a way to fund these activities laid out in their student equity plans. This provides the colleges with the resources and the flexibility to fund the programs and strategies for their particular students and their particular communities. The colleges can use these resources to scale successful federal, state, or local programs, or they can provide a host of other services that will lead to reducing student equity gaps such as outreach, professional development, and curriculum redesign.
Thank you. The legislative analyst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you turn to page 9 of the handout, has our assessment and recommendation. As I spoke about earlier in this hearing and earlier in the handout, community college students are generally speaking high need. Not all 2.3 million students, but a substantial number, a substantial percentage are financially needy, academically underprepared, arriving with needs in English. There might be English learners, first-generation college-goers. At the same time, community colleges continue to operate with a number of relatively small and prescriptive categorical programs. And the figure on page 9 shows 8 student support categorical programs. 7 of them, not including disabled student program, provide largely similar services to similar types students. The Student Success Task Force, which came out with recommendations in 2012, concluded in their study that the current approach, this categorical approach, results in organizational silos, there's that word, that are inefficient and create unnecessary barriers for students. Now, as Mr. Troy mentioned, the task force did not reach consensus on a specific recommendation, but did find that there were problems. So we really applaud the governor for addressing this issue, the issue of student success and of flexibility. If anything, we think that the proposal could go further. Mr. Nastandi, you asked about the block grant. We've recommended in the past and continue to put out there as something to consider, an alternative approach, providing substantially more flexibility to community colleges by consolidating 7 categorical programs and associated funding into a student support block grant. And in so doing, allowing colleges to combine funds and giving them more ability to provide wraparound services to students, the types of services students need, not just students in EOPS, Extended Opportunity Program and services, not just the 75,000 students in that program, that very good program, but it's just 75,000 students. The idea of coming out of the Student Success Task Force and all the work of the legislature is we need more students. We need to scale up. We need opportunities for many more students to get comprehensive services. And so we think this would be a way to get at that and giving flexibility to districts to design programs that are perhaps more efficient and get at students' comprehensive sets of needs.
Thank you. And the Vice Chancellor or any other representative of the Chancellor's office.
Yes, there's a host of issues addressed in this agenda item. I'd like to say first and foremost that we're extremely supportive and appreciative of the $100 million proposed increase for the Student Success and Support Program. I know we've partnered with the legislature and with the administration on implementing the Student Success Task Force implementations, and this program I think is really the linchpin of it. That's the program that requires colleges to provide assessment and orientation for all new students and ensure that they're on the path to actually taking courses that meet their identified goals within the plan. We think this will help increase the efficiency and success of the student experience and make our system much more efficient over time. So we're very supportive of that. In terms of the student equity plans, we think there's a great appeal to the proposal in that, as the finance stated, it provides districts with a lot of flexibility to meet the needs they identify on their campus. We know that the regulations in place for student equity plans provide target populations for districts to address, whether those be disabled students, Latinos, Asian Americans, whites, blacks, et cetera. It requires districts to look at all those populations, assess their success by a number of standards such as completion, access, transfer rates, and other criteria. And by putting resources into the proposal, I think that this will really help beef up district efforts to meet the achievement gaps as they are identified in a data-driven way on their campus. So we think that it's a proposal that has a lot of merit to it and is worthy of consideration. And with that, I turn over to the Chancellor.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. My name is Helen Benjamin. I'm the Chancellor of the Contra Costa Community College District, and I'm in my 9th year of service to the district in that position. I'm also serving this year as the chair of the league board and as the chair of the CEO board. And so I'm here just to speak a few moments about the student equity plans and the $100 million that's being considered for that. I am obviously a proponent of that because I think there's a very, very high need for it. And I just want to give you a context because in Mr. Rodriguez's opening statement, he indicated that the plans had not been funded, had not been developed over the last few years. I just want to iterate very strongly that we have never stopped talking about student equity and planning for student equity. And in 2010, the Community College League, its two affiliate organizations, the trustee organization and the CEO boards, adopted the Commission on the Future, a report entitled A 2020 Vision for Student Success, which set forth the following three goals: success, which indicated that we would increase completions by 1 million by 2020, equity, we would eliminate the achievement gap, and access, we will close participation rates, hence the button, success, equity, and access. So operationally, this equated to the need to monitor access and success by ethnicity and social class. And as you know, the demographic in our state is changing, is changed, continues to change. And these were issues as trustees and CEOs we thought were relevant and things we had to address. Achievement gaps between groups would be a college priority to address by implementing successful evidence-based interventions. Last month, to jumpstart the discussion once again, the League hosted what we called Equity 2014. Over 175 attendees from 60 colleges, and I must say, on kind of short notice, traveled to Oakland to focus on what actions would have an immediate impact on course completion and success rates and could be incorporated into our student equity plans. Community college leaders, and that would include administrators, faculty, classified staff, and students, know the proven strategies which work: instruction in small cohorts, wraparound services, tutoring, and mentoring. Many of our institutions have successful programs, models of excellence which we are unable to move to the next level in terms of serving more students. Colleges, all of us, have been stopped in our tracks by the lack of ongoing resources to make additional investments into the fixed costs of running these programs. We need you to provide the flexible resources to take evidence-based, campus-designated solutions to scale. And I just want to share a few of those kinds of programs that we know work. Expanding learning communities on campus, summer bridge programs, first-year experience programs, the freshman experience, contextualized basic skills CTE classes, supplemental instruction in math and English, and expanded hours in reading and math labs, more tutors in basic skills classes. We need our mentoring programs expanded. We need peer mentoring, but that we know that's another proven strategy that works. We need technology resources available to students and technology outreach services to support high school outreach, college outreach, and community outreach. We need to build on the existing programs we have, like Puente, Umoja, all kinds of persistence programs. We have programs that focus on women in industry. We have MESA programs. We need bilingual staff support when reaching out to high schools. We need to increase outreach for financial aid. And we need to restore and expand evening and weekend hours of the library. We know that all of these strategies work. We need the $100 million of resources to implement what we know works, but for lack of funds have not been able to offer. We also recognize we need to be accountable for the resources provided, so we're not asking for resources without the element of accountability. Our intent is to spend these dollars on proven strategies based in research with evidence to demonstrate success. These are critical, flexible resources our system has been lacking for years. Let us plan and demonstrate through the continued updating of our student equity plans the positive outcomes our colleges are able to achieve. At the same time, we need a commitment on the part of the state to continue to invest in this effort. And I just want to take a moment to talk about some of the things we're doing in the Contra Costa District, where we have 3 colleges. Every college in this nation has a strategic plan. Every college in this state has a section of that strategic plan that deals with student equity and how we meet the needs of the changing demographic. And in many of our plans, equity is the theme that runs throughout those plans. That's just a given. I just want to share with you, and I think it's true for most of our colleges, and we looked at the data in our district in the fall of this academic year, 2013. Of all of our first-time students, 75 to 80% of those students enrolled in classes that were below college level. That is a reality that we deal with every day. And so we have a responsibility to meet those students where they are and get them where they need to be in order to be successful students, in order to achieve that certificate, that degree that will make them very, very positive and successful contributors to our society. And so we have some programs, and what we would like to do, and we're planning, we do some of it, but if we had more money, we could do more. And what research also shows is that the students who come to us directly from high school are the ones who complete at the highest levels. They really are. So we go into the high schools. We would like to do more of this. Go in to the high schools in the senior year, connect with those seniors who are interested in coming to community colleges, and even convince some of those who aren't that they need to come. Start with them in that fall semester, get them into a summer bridge program to get them ready, and we are pretty sure that those students who are prepared in that way through those summer bridge programs, not the 30 or 60 we can afford, but if we could do 100, 200, 300 of those students, we know that our success rates would improve. We are also looking at a restorative justice program, and we're looking at it in 2 ways. One, to connect with students before incarceration. So we are planning a meeting, this is really true, we're going to meet with a judge, because we want to give the judge the option of sentencing, quote unquote, students to college rather than to the alternative. And we don't have we have the mechanisms, we just don't have the finance. So we need help. We want to reach out not only to students who plan to come, but those who don't even think that college, I think there's some rocket scientists out there. I really do. But we have to identify them, and we have to get them in our doors, get them interested in college, help them to realize that there is a value in obtaining a college degree or certificate. And we do a little bit of it now, and we can't sustain it because the funding comes, the funding goes. It's not fair to all of the people in my position and all the people who work in our colleges who put all the effort into this, and then the money goes away and we can't continue. I could go on, but I'll stop. But thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. All right, questions from the committee. Mr. Nastandi, I know I had cut you off or redirected you earlier, but...
well, thank you. Maybe if Mr. Steenhausen can talk about maybe a little bit more why. I'd like to hear a little bit of back and forth if we could, or maybe from finance about the categoricals, about collapsing those and putting them in a block grant. The for and against, and I guess you heard maybe why he doesn't like them. Do you have a retort to that? Maybe? A little one?
Well, under our proposal, districts could do things exactly the same way they're doing now. We don't think they would. There are a number of areas where colleges can relook at how they're delivering services, the type of services they're delivering to students. And students don't just need assessment orientation counseling. They need to talk to a financial aid advisor, child care, transportation, some help with textbooks. And so our recommendation, our proposal is to give that flexibility to districts to be more innovative, come up with their own program delivery models, while still providing assurance to the legislature that these monies are still being spent on student services as opposed to just general salary increase or something.
Right. Mr. Troy, and so you could do the same thing, just with some flexibility to maybe one category needs more than the other. And why would you want to use those words, those silos? Why would you want to keep all those silos as opposed to allowing the flexibility?
Yeah, no, I certainly understand the point. I think it's noteworthy that as opposed to the K-12 system, or at least K-12 system prior to LCFF, I think there was something like 35 or 40% of their dollars were tied up into categorical spending, something along those lines. It may be a little out of date, but I think that's where they were. By contrast, in our system, it's much smaller. It's about 7 or 8%. So when you look at the dollars we do have currently in the categorical pots, they're generally there to protect certain or provide specific services to certain populations that we think are probably still worth preserving. Now, as we go forward in the system, as new funds come in, we think it's one thing to disrupt all those programs that are already proven some success, but we think finance has kind of proposed a kind of a balanced approach whereby we're still maintaining some of those existing programs with their history and their track record and their support while providing new funds to the system, categorical funds to the system in ways that are more flexible going forward. So we think they achieve a certain balance on that we're comfortable with.
But just to end on this, Mr. Chairman, if I can, he's not advocating that you do not fund those. He's, once again, whatever the local government board thinks is appropriate. So if those are good programs, they should certainly be funded. I think he's just looking at, which we did over the last few years, cost savings through the bureaucracy. Do you need these separate categoricals? They may be good in and of themselves, and they'll keep being funded. It's just a question of, do you have to have the mandate that they go in those individual silos?
Yeah, I certainly appreciate, that perspective that districts can continue doing things the same way as if they wish to do so, and depending on the local support for those programs. I think part of our response too is simply that we feel like we've made some headway on student success over the last couple of years in terms of revising the way matriculation works and to focus it more on assessment and counseling services and providing an ed plan for students. And I think we would not want to divert from that progress we've made in that time. So I think we are a little more supportive of the governor's approach at this time.
I have a question. Mr. Chang, do you have a question? Okay.
Yeah, just a quick question. I know that there's been a pause due to the budget crisis around the colleges preparing the student equity plans. Did you feel confident that, given that break, that they would be able to pick up where they left off and be able to continue to develop those plans?
There's no doubt in my mind, and some colleges have continued to work on their student equity plans. There is no problem in completing that goal.
I want to make sure I understand. So the governor's proposal is to increase funding for student success and support programs overall by $200 million, with the $100 million allocated in support of all students and the remaining $100 allocated to districts who serve high-needs students. It seems like there's some overlap in the $100 million for the student equity versus some of the existing student support programs like EOPS or CalWorks. Is there any distinction that we should keep in mind as we're continuing these budget deliberations?
I think you're exactly right. There is a whole lot of overlap, and I think the LAO's handout on page 9 demonstrates that generally these programs are kind of all doing the same thing. They're providing counseling services in a unique way, in a specific way. Providing counseling services. Some of them provide book grants or other forms of grants for supplies, tutoring. They're kind of doing the same thing. And what we're saying is, as opposed to developing or investing in a statewide program that says do X, Y, and Z, what we're saying is, you know what? You know your students the best. You can contextualize your programs if you're in Lake Tahoe if you're in Compton, if you're in Marin, if you're in Kern, you can kind of develop the programs and strategies that are suit your students' needs, and kind of focus, kind of get outside of just funding a program, but get the whole school and the whole college focusing on how can we set goals for these students, monitor those goals, and kind of lift them up, and so that's what we're saying.
Okay, and so I may not have completely understood that. I'd like to turn back to the LAO. How is this, apparent flexible approach that the governor is proposing different from the block grant proposal that you're making?
The governor's proposal would provide $100 million, that second $100 million, for high-need students that could be used for a range of services and activities. And in addition, provides partial flexibility, 25% on 3 others. Our recommendation would take 7 of those, including all the money in the Student Success Support Program, and allow them to use for various purposes. I just thought about Summer Bridge might be one of the activities they fund. I'm not sure any of these are doing that right now. These individual, you'd have to go to the regs or the Community College Guideline Handbook, go to page 50 and see if you can use those monies for Summer Bridge. But under our recommendation, yeah, if you want to do it, you can use it for Summer Bridge. It gets away from how the money is spent and more focus on, is it serving students?
If I can just follow up. For example, the student equity funds can be used to serve disabled students or to provide more support for disabled students?
Yes.
That is the governor's
absolutely. The students with disabilities are included in the student equity plans.
Yeah, they're specifically called out. It's race, gender, and disability.
Under our recommendation, the disabled students program would not be part of the block grant. That would not be part of it. And so those monies would continue to be restricted. But certainly if colleges wanted to use other monies for disabled students to enhance that level of service for students who are learning disabled or physically disabled or another disability, they'd be permitted to do so.
They can decide that on a campus-by-campus basis according to the need.
That's right.
I mean, the idea behind the administration's proposal is that it's likely that the current pot for each of the categoricals is going to grow. Each of those pots is going to get some of that additional $100 million. We just feel like we're not in a position to say, well, we think the disabled should get 20 of that, and the CalWorks should get 15 of that. So,
all right.
Ideally, they'll all get somewhere.
All right, Mr. Chavez.
I'm in strong support of this. I think it's exactly the right thing to do. Maybe because I sit on the K-12 committee also, the local control funding is giving the authority to the school boards to meet the educational needs of their students. And in Fresno, it's different than in San Diego. And the relationship between the K-12 system and the community colleges, especially looking at students taking community college courses while they're still in high school, to show them to start thinking about college, I think is right on target because it gives the responsibility down to the local authorities. And I'd like to highlight probably also with this money here, this $200 million, 80% of the veterans that are returning back from the war go to community colleges. And I'm sure they're going to be served by these funds there. So I think it's a great thing. Only sad part I have about this, when I look at this, as I mentioned earlier, I went to a community college. When I attended a community college, I was accepted to UCLA. I decided to go to El Camino we had a better wrestling team. So it was the best wrestling team in the nation. So it's a different, back then the community college, you had, I remember the libraries, I remember the medical facilities, I remember the faculty hours. You'd be in small classes. My friend was at UCLA taking a lecture series with 500 kids, but you could do it the same class in English at a community college with 30 kids. I mean, so the educational experience was great, and the sports, as I just mentioned. How we went from that to what we're talking about now, not now, but I would really like to have somebody tell me, what happened? What happened? I mean, I'm glad we're fixing some of these things, but something happened between 1969 when I went to El Camino and 2014.
Thank you. Any other questions for the issue of student success proposals? Seeing none, I would like to move on then to the online initiative, and I'd like to propose, for the sake of time management, that we address the next issues 3 through 7 together, and hold off on committee questions until the end. So the next issue is the online initiative.
Just a question, Chair. Did you want us to introduce each one, go in order, or just introduce them all? And
if you could just, let's see, how should we do this?
Make it concise.
Yeah, why don't for the sake of organization, why don't we take it issue by issue, and then have the presentation on each issue.
Okay. Leading up to the development of the current year budget, the administration worked with the Chancellor's Office to develop a common course management system, which will provide a one-stop shop for online courses across the system and across the state. The current year budget included $16.9 million for the first year of the initiative, with the agreement that in future years it would be reduced to $10 million, and this is what you see in the budget.
All right. LAO?
So as part of the appropriation, the $16.9 million, there's a reporting requirement for the Chancellor's Office to report on progress in spending these funds. We just received a copy of that progress report for the online initiative. We're still reviewing it. It does appear that projects still very much seem to be in the beginning stages. And for example, community colleges are still hiring staff, and they indicate they'll be able to hire fully, get the whole team in place by the very end of this year. So it's highly doubtful that all $16.9 million appropriated in the current year will be needed. And that could have implications for whether community colleges will need all $10 million that the governor proposes in 2014-15. And the legislature does not have a good sense at this point from that progress report about how much funding is appropriate in the current year and budget year. So to the extent the full amount is not required, we recommend the legislature redirect freed up money for other high priorities.
Thank you.
Yes, we remain supportive of the funding levels provided in the budget, both in the current year and what's proposed for the budget year. That does reflect the expenditure plan we provided last year when the proposal was approved by the legislature. I think that the key issue is to keep in mind that we need to appropriately fund the projects to succeed, and regardless of whether the dollars are spent over 12 months or 18 months isn't as important as whether we're appropriately funding the project to meet the program objectives. So while we may not literally spend all $16.9 million provided in the current year before June 30th, it will be encumbered by then and expended afterwards. And I think note that some of the tasks provided in the 16.9 are a lot of startup activities, whereas the $10 million support the ongoing nature of the program, so that some of the tasks are somewhat discrete on that. If we send the signal to the vendors, for example, that there's not some kind of guarantee that there's $10 million ongoing, that may reflect the bids. It may diminish the willingness of faculty to participate in the program development aspects of the project. So we do think that it's appropriate to continue to fund the project based on the expenditure plan we submitted. Now, over time, if we see that $10 million is more than what's required, we're very willing to come back to the legislature and to finance and to adjust that number. But for now, we think it's a solid estimate.